Hey everyone, in this chapter 17 video, we're going to continue our discussion of different market structures. Here we're going to focus on oligopoly or duopoly. An oligopoly is where there are few sellers and they have market power. We'll also touch on game theory some. So while self-interest motivates people to act in their own good or in their own self-interest, in a duopoly, there are only a few sellers, and there's a temptation to cooperate so that those few sellers are better off. So think of OPEC. In an effort to maximize the profits, a duopoly can reach an agreement on the quantities they will produce and sell, and they will do so under a unified price to charge that price and maximize their profits. This is an act of collusion among what we would call now a cartel. This could be compared to turning them into a monopoly in aggregate. However, each may have their own cost curves, so they can earn different profits. Here it talks about collusion and cartels. In the absence of regulations, oligopolies may struggle to act as a cartel, as each member considers whether they should abide by agreements or produce more to earn a greater share of the profits. You may hear OPEC set production limits. We're going to produce this much so that the price stays stable. But then you may hear of other countries like Iran producing higher quantities to earn more of the profit than infighting among the OPEC countries. So how do we figure out what firms might do in this situation, or in that instance, countries? We have to consider what firm A might do, acting in their own self-interest, while making assumptions about what firm B might do. So if you're a business thinking about, okay, there's a few sellers, if I want to maximize my own profits, I have to make assumptions about what the other company would do in response to what I do, or their own self-interest, and plan accordingly. So these companies might say, okay, we're producing a certain amount now, say 60 gallons per day. If we cut that in half, split the profits, we have a stable price and we're earning fair amounts. However, firm A may decide to produce a greater quantity, and that would lower prices on all the barrels sold, but firm A would earn a greater share of the profits. However, firm B might do the same thing, and they could end up both being worse off, producing in suboptimal quantities with respect to their own interest. Knowing this, each firm may decide to hold this certain quantity and reach a Nash Equilibrium, which is a situation which occurs when economic actors interacting with one another choose their best strategy given the strategies that all other actors have chosen. So read through the rest of the chapter and you'll get a better understanding of this. I also recommend watching A Beautiful Mind. So when firms in an oligopoly individually choose production to maximize profit, they produce a quantity of output greater than the level produced by a monopoly, which sounds like a good quiz question, but less than the level produced under perfect competition, which also sounds like another part of a quiz or test question. We've previously seen the output effect, so how much will an increase in quantity change profit, and the price effect. When increasing quantity lowers the price for all units sold, how much will that offset profits? Because you're going to sell all quantities at that lower price. If the output effect is stronger, increasing production will increase profits. If the price effect is greater, it will decrease it. So production will be adjusted until these two effects are balanced. The fewer sellers there are, the more concentrated their market power is. The more sellers there are, the less concerned each is about their own impact on prices. As the number of firms become very large and each takes price as given, the quantity approaches the socially efficient level. Let's go ahead and pause for this first quick quiz. Questions 1 through 4. Attend them yourself and then come back. Question 1, the key feature of an oligopolistic market is that D, a small number of firms are acting strategically. Question 2, if an oligopolistic industry organizes itself as a cooperative cartel, it will produce a quantity of output C less than the competitive level and equal to the monopoly level. C. Question 3, if an oligopoly does not cooperate and each firm chooses its own quantity, the industry will produce a quantity that A is less than the competitive level, but more than the monopoly level. And then question 4, as the number of firms in an oligopoly grows, the industry approaches a level of output that is D equal to the competitive level and more than the monopoly level. Here we're going to go through the prisoner's dilemma, which you may have heard before. Maybe you'll consider if you ever find yourself in jail. You definitely should remember this coming out of this class. It's a famous concept to go through. It illustrates why cooperation is difficult to maintain, even when it's mutually beneficial. So 2 prisoners face a dilemma of whether to confess or remain silent. So we've got here Bonnie and Clyde pretending they were caught instead of killed. Your personal result depends on not just your actions, which is confess or remain silent, but also the actions of your partner. But you have to decide without knowing with certainty what they'll do, because even though they may say, hey, I'm not going to snitch, I'm not going to confess, they may or may not do that. As you can see here, Clyde, if he confesses, his result depends on if Bonnie confesses or remains silent. If Clyde confesses, well, he's going to get 8 years regardless. But if he confesses and Bonnie remains silent, Bonnie is going to get 20 years and he's going to go free. Sorry, Clyde got 8 years if she confesses, if Bonnie does. But if Clyde remains silent, but Bonnie confesses. So if Clyde confesses, or we'll say cooperates, you can see here, I kind of wish it says cooperates, but when Clyde cooperates and Bonnie cooperates, they're both going to get 8 years. When Clyde cooperates, but Bonnie remains silent, she's going to get the 20 years. Clyde's going to get the benefit of going free because he cooperated. When Clyde remains silent, but Bonnie cooperates, she goes free. Clyde gets 20 years. But when neither of them cooperate, when both remain silent, they each only get 1 year. So total, they spend much less time in jail if they both remain silent. However, each of them does spend 1 year in jail as opposed to going free. See that there. So if there is a strategy that yields you your best result from that payoff matrix, regardless of what the other player does, then that's a dominant strategy that you'll go with. In figure 2, when choosing between producing 30 or 40 gallons like we talked about previously, Jack's result will always be better when he produces 40 gallons versus him producing the lower quantity of 30. Doesn't even matter what Jill does with respect to his decision. That means producing 40 gallons is a dominant strategy for Jack. The same is true for Jill, so each will produce 40 gallons, and each will be worse off than if they had produced 30 gallons. You can see that here. You're looking from Jack's perspective, 40 versus 30. Well, if he produces 40 gallons here, he's going to get 1,600 profit or 2,000 profit, depending upon what Jill does. but that 1600 is greater than the 1500 he'd get producing 30 here. This 2000 is greater than the 1800 he would get producing here. So it's always better for him to choose the 40 gallons. I mentioned OPEC earlier, where they agree to produce a certain amount, but they don't always agree. These companies, or countries in this case, are going to use game theory to determine what they're going to do. Another application of game theory is used in what was used in the Cold War for nuclear weapons discussions and decisions. There's a lot you can read on that. Not everyone agrees, but the decisions were viewed through this lens on what they should do. However, the stakes are very different. I would like to point out when your choices are, how much profit to earn based on how many barrels of oil to produce versus the specter of nuclear annihilation. In the previous chapter, we've talked about the problem with common resources and getting overused, sometimes referred to as the tragedy of the commons. Those resources are not used efficiently, and so everyone ends up worse off than they could have been, even when individuals act in their own self-interest. The lack of perfect cooperation among oligopolists actually helps society, since it minimizes that deadweight loss, since they're producing greater quantities compared to if they were working as an effective monopoly. Let's go ahead and pause for the quick quiz. Questions 5 and 6. Attempt them yourself, then come back. All right, question 5. The prisoner's dilemma is a two-person game illustrating that C, even if cooperation is better than the Nash equilibrium, each person might have an incentive not to cooperate. That's why it's a dilemma. Then question 6. Two people facing the prisoner's dilemma may cooperate if B, they will play the game repeatedly and expect non-cooperation to be met with future retaliation. There's a video at this point I'd like you to go ahead and bring up on your computer to watch after we finish this video. This problem, the video is this game theory problem will change the way you see the world. I'm going to read this, not CERN, but that YouTube channel, and copy this or just search that on YouTube. It's a good video that really hits home the point about non-cooperation now leading to future retaliation and how all this games out. It's a very interesting video. There are other factors to consider here. The legal system generally frowns on anti-competitive behavior or firms acting as a monopoly or oligopoly or duopoly. So that's something to consider. People watching this video may be too young to remember what happened with the price for LCDs and how that impacted the price of TVs. They dropped dramatically once antitrust legislation caught up, or at least the courts caught up with firms that were doing price fixing. So what type of behavior should be regulated? That's not universally agreed upon. This may be a reason why legislation seems to lag behind the behavior we see, especially when it comes to things like buying online becoming more popular. Companies are working to aggregate data about us so they can charge us different prices. That topic is going to become increasingly important year after year. If you're not already hearing about it, look into it because you will be hearing about it more. I'm not just talking about surge pricing, but I'm talking about specific individual level pricing, charging you more. Hey, this person is more willing to pay a higher price for this. They have a lower elasticity. We're going to go ahead and take advantage of that and charge them more, and take some of that consumer surplus away from them. Sometimes low prices aren't the benefit you're expecting. Some companies or even countries will charge a price lower than their marginal cost to take or cannibalize some of the market share from other companies. And the idea is they will later, after they've driven out other firms or other countries, they will then charge a price greater than the marginal cost and yield profits once they've driven everyone else out of the industry. Sometimes they tie the purchase of one product to another. This happens a lot, or has happened with movie tickets, buying a ticket to one movie being tied to buying a ticket to another. It's typically frowned upon and is seen as hurting consumers. There's a famous Microsoft case in the 90s when they bundled their internet browser with Windows, and that was seen as anti-competitive behavior. The famous case of the telecom company AT&T being broken up into the smaller regional Bell companies. However, many of those companies have been able to re-emerge as regulation has perhaps lessened with respect to that. I recommend reading on some of the behavior Amazon is doing that some consider anti-competitive. There's a lot of that going on, and some of their legal actions and what that does to competitors. Let's go ahead and pause for the quick quiz, questions 7 and 8. Pause, attempt it yourself, and then come back. Question 7, the antitrust laws aim to prevent firms from acting in ways that reduce competition because our system desires competition. And then question 8, antitrust enforcement is controversial mainly because B, some business practices that seem anti-competitive may in fact have a legitimate purpose. So if you're merging, you're trying to reduce your average total cost curve so that you can remain competitive. And free entry and exit in mergers may help those struggling businesses survive. So are there laws to protect consumers and producers you would like to see? If so, think through who would be the winners and losers if those policies were implemented. What could be some of the direct and indirect effects of that? Let me know what you think. Feel free to comment. I highly recommend watching some of these movies if you consider this class more than just a requirement. If you're actually interested in seeing some of this in popular culture, here's a list of some movies you can watch that are good, or down here I've got some series that are good to watch. Now I'm on Pluribus, and that's an interesting show so far. Please go through and practice this, and practice the graphs comparing the different market structures. All right, let me know if you have any questions or comments, and see you all in the next video.